Hi, my name is Spencer Bissell, and this presentation is covering um, why Quebec has such a reputation for being very French, whereas the rest of Canada is more English-based and not as French as Quebec is, or doesn't have such a big impact on how its culture is compared to the rest of Canada. So the whole reason I started this sort of research project is because I was wondering why Quebec, Canada, is so French compared to the rest of Canada, which is more of a has more like English than Quebec is, because Quebec you hear a lot of people speaking French and stuff like that, and while other parts of Canada also speak French, they don't speak it as heavily as a place like Quebec does. And so I wanted to research why that might be, or what the purpose might be for why French has such an effect on that one place when compared to the rest of Canada. So Quebec somewhat started all the way back in 1534 to 15, or in like about 1534 to 1535, when a French explorer called or named Jacques Cartier landed in what is now considered Gaspé, and he sort of like took over the land in the name of the current king of France during that time. And when he landed in that area, he brought sort of the like European traditions of like expansion and all that to the land, where there were like thousands of Indians, and like thousands of Inuits, which is the name of, or that like, or which is the like true name of the Eskimos um, that we know from Antarctica, and like French people sort of started like permanently settling there in 1608 when another explorer named Samuel de Champlain created a fort at a place called Camp Diamond, which is actually the original name of Quebec City, which is the capital of Quebec. And thanks to the start of Quebec City's creation, there was the idea of New France, which um, was was created because of Quebec City, another city named Trois Rivières, and Montreal. And eventually, this New France ended up including um, a very large territory that included Nova Scotia, Cape Breton Island, and Newfoundland. And the territory extended all the way to Louisiana. Now, unfortunately, the French lost a lot of these territories after they were defeated twice by Great Britain during the War of the Spanish Succession and during the Seven-Year War. Uh, in the War of the Spanish Succession, Great Britain acquired Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland, and all of the lands around Hudson Bay. Um, the rest of the territory of New France, except for Louisiana and the islands of Saint Pierre and Miquelon, which were in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, were given to Great Britain in the Treaty of Paris after the Seven-Year War. And in 1774, while these areas were still under British rule, um, Great Britain was having difficulty with keeping their 13 colonies in the Americas in check because they were angry at the British for all sorts of stuff that you already have learned about with the American Revolution. Um, and so the British, in order to stop their um, French colonies from carrying out these very same things in Quebec um, passed the Quebec Act, which allowed all the French Catholics in Quebec, which there were many, it allowed them to um, practice their religion freely. Um, it legalized the seigneurial system, um, or the French versions of the seigneurial system. It recognized the French's civil code and re-extended the boundaries of Quebec into the Ohio and Mississippi valleys in order to satisfy um, all French fur traders in Quebec and in order to maintain any alliances with the Indians. Um, Fortunately for the British, this worked, and a lot of the French Canadians remained neutral when America led forces into Quebec to invade it in 1775. But unfortunately, after the British lost the Revolutionary War, thousands of British loyalists fled to Quebec. And when they got there, they demanded land and representation in its government, um, which caused the British to create the Constitutional Act in 1791, which ended up dividing Quebec into two pieces, um, called Lower Canada, which was Quebec, and Upper Canada, which is now called Ontario. Um, and the whole place was divided along the Ottawa River, and Lower Canada was more the place for like any French who were still in or who were still living in Canada, whereas Upper Canada was more the spot for all the British loyalists who were coming into the country. And the act also created a system for an elected assembly and for the appointment of executive and legislative councils in Quebec. Um, the French Canadian part of Quebec um, was in the majority in or they were in the majority and they were able to like sort of dominate the elected assembly, so they were always like in charge and the British didn't have much say in it. But the British were able to hold full control of the anointed or appointed executives and or of the executive councils and the legislative councils. Now, by the 1830s, British merchants in Quebec were starting to increase the amount of control that they had over the commercial and financial life of the people in Lower Canada. Um, and during that time, there was also the start of an agricultural crisis as um, wheat production decreased, which was a very important cash crop for Quebec. Um, and and also, like another thing that was also happening during all this was that the French Canadian middle class was starting to become dissatisfied with their domination of the General Assembly because the British wouldn't give them any important powers that could really change anything in Quebec. Um, and so there were several attempts to try and fix this, or several parties were created, like kind of in rebellion of these, um, or of these like lack of powers, but they were quickly stomped out by the British. But fortunately for the French Canadians, in 1848, um, the British, or the British, eventually gave uh, more responsibility over to Quebec's government because they were under a lot of pressure from um, like French Canadian political reformers and British political reformers, and Quebec itself, and a lot of the other colonies that Great Britain had in Canada were starting to become quite expensive, so they wanted to get rid of a lot of the costs that they had. And fortunately, thanks to these new responsibilities, it gave the French Canadians more power in the government, so they were able to uh, implement the use of their language in the General Assembly instead of having to learn English so that the British could understand them. And they got full control over the educational, social, and municipal um, institutions for Lower Canada, which was now going by the name of Canada East. Now, in 1867, another Constitution Act was created where the British Parliament in Great Britain um, created a sort of like a quasi autonomous federation, which they called the Dominion of Canada, which comprised of um, Quebec, Ontario, which was Upper Canada, a place called West Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Um, the French Canadian community were given control over the government of Quebec, um, so they could design like Quebec's social, economic, and political programs um, in order to make the place how they would want it to be, rather than reflecting how the British wanted it to be. And in the 1850s, there was an increased amount of immigration that helped to increase the French Canadian population in Quebec. And these immigrants were most likely from places in or other like locations in Canada um, that contained a lot of like French Canadians in them who heard about how great Quebec was and how like the French um, still have like or how the French language is still used there and how many French ideals are still like in that um, little like territory instead of it all being the ideals of a country who just came in and took all their land, similar to how Great Britain took um, all of France's land in Canada when they had to, or when they beat France in the two previously mentioned wars. So the main thing that helped me to realize why Quebec is like so like strongly French when the rest of Canada is mostly like English or shares like the ideals of many English speaking countries such as Great Britain and America um, is because they were originally or Quebec was originally a French colony before it had to be given over to the British after, um, after they demanded the territories and the two previously mentioned treaties. Now, as this video comes to a close, I would like to thank you for listening to me ramble on about why Quebec is so French and not English like the rest of Canada. And I hope you learned something from my ramblings. But if you didn't, then that's fine. I'm not going to criticize at all. Um, but I hope you have a good day today, wherever you are, and thank you for being here and wasting your time listening to me talk.